Chapter 1. My father was a Saint Bernard, my mother was a collie, but I am a Presbyterian. That was what my mother told me. I don't know the subtle differences myself. To me it's just nice big words that don't mean anything. My mother had tenderness for such things, so she liked to pronounce them and surprise other dogs and be envious of how educated she was. But in fact it was not real education, it was only show. She knew the words by hearing them in the dining room and when there was company there, and by going to Sunday school with the children and listening to them there. And whenever she heard a big word she repeated it to herself several times, and thus was able to retain them till the dogmatic gathering was in the neighborhood, after which she forgot them again, and surprised and outraged them all, from pocket pup to bulldog, which repaid her for all her efforts. If there was a stranger there, he was almost suspicious, and when he came to, he would ask what it meant. And she always explained it to him. He never expected it, but thought he was leading her down a blind alley, so that when she explained it to him, he was the one who had to be ashamed, whereas he thought she had to be ashamed. The others were always waiting for that, and happy about it and proud of it, because they knew what would happen, because they already had experience with it. When she explained the meaning of a great word, they were all so carried away with admiration, that it never occurred to any dog to doubt whether it was right, and that was natural, because to everything she answered, the answer came as quickly as if a dictionary spoke for her, and besides, how were they to know whether it was right or not? But also because she was the only cultured dog there. In time, as I grew up, she brought home the word unintellectual, one time, and worked it very hard all the week in different meetings, causing her much unhappiness and dejection, and I noticed this time that she was asked the meaning at 8 different meetings, and shot out a fresh definition each time, which showed me that she had more presence of mind than breeding, to which, of course, I said nothing. She always had a word that she kept paraded and ready like a lifesaver, a word for emergencies that she clung to when she suddenly seemed to be drowning from the questions. That word was synonymous. When it also happens that she picks up a word from weeks gone by and has long forgotten its prepared meanings, and then when a stranger has been stupefied by that word for a few minutes, he would come to her while she had already taken a different course with the wind, and expecting nothing, he would confront her. I, the only dog who knows the game, can see her sail flapping for a moment, but only for a moment. Then it gets full and punishing again and she'd say, as calm as a summer's day, it's synonymous with supererogation, or some goddamned long ago extinct word like that. In the best started in the next house, has content the law of the And it was the same with the phrases. She would drag home a whole phrase if it sounded great, and will perform it 6 nights and 2 matinees, explaining it anew each time, the meaning of which she cared absolutely nothing about, and she only cared about the accuracy of the phrase. She knew these dogs didn't have enough sense to blow her cover. Yes, she was a fine specimen. She wasn't afraid of anything. She had such confidence in the ignorance of these creatures. She even told jokes she had heard in the family and from the guests, which were laughed at. And like a rule, she would make a jumping point tied to the others, which of course were no good, and when that happened, she would fall on her back and roll on the floor and laugh and bark in a really maniacal way, while I could see her wondering why it didn't seem as funny as when she had heard it. But it was no big deal. The others rolled and barked along, embarrassed themselves as they didn't understand what it was about and didn't realize that it wasn't their fault and that there was no reason to laugh at all. Through these things you could see how conceited and frivolous her character was. Yet, she had merits to bring to something, I think. She had a kind heart and tenderness, and never hid anger when she was hurt, but spoke it out and then forgot it again. And she taught her children this kindly way, and from her we have also learned to act bravely and without hesitation in danger, and not to run away, but to face the danger that threatened friend or stranger and help him as well as we could without thinking what it would cost us. And she taught us not only through language, but also by example. And that is the best, safest and most enduring way to teach. Why she did the brave things, the splendid things. She was a soldier, and so modest about it too well, one could not help admiring her and imitating her. Not even King Charles the Spaniel could remain altogether detestable in her company. So, you see, there was more to her than just her education. Chapter 2. When I was big enough, eventually, I was sold and taken away, and I never saw her again. Her heart was broken, and mine too, and we wept, and she comforted me as best she could, and said we come into this world for a wise and good purpose, and must do our service without argument, accepting our lives as they are, living so as to please others, and never worrying about the consequences. It is not our business. She said men who did so would get a noble and beautiful reward in the afterlife, and although we animals would never get there, doing well and right without reward would give our short lives some honor and dignity, which is a reward in itself. She collected these things as she walked along with the children from time to Sunday school, and had them more carefully stored up in her mind than her other words and phrases, and she dwelt more on them, for our good as well as hers. You could see that she had a wise and thoughtful head, despite the fact that there was so much frivolity and vanity there. So, then we said goodbye and looked at each other with tears. And the last thing she said, what I remember most, I think, was, in memory of me, if any danger comes and anyone is in need, don't think of yourself, think of your mother and do what she would do. Do you think I could forget that? No. Chapter 3. It was such a charming home. My new one, a fine, beautiful house, with pictures, and delicate decorations, and rich furniture, and no hopelessness anywhere, but everywhere dainty colors lighted up by the flooding sunshine, and the spacious grounds around, and the grand garden, oh, the noble trees, and flowers, no end. And I was the same as a member of the family, and they loved me, and caressed me, and gave me no new name, but called me by my old name, which was dear to me, because my mother gave it to me, Aileen Mavourneen. She had it out of a song, and the Greys knew the song, and said it was a beautiful name. Mrs. Grey was 30, and so sweet and so dear, you can't imagine, and Sadie was 10, and just like her mother, almost like a cute little copy of her, with her auburn braids down her back, and the short bodice, and the baby was a year old, and plump, and had dimples, and liked me, and could never get enough of feeding on my tail, and squeezing me, and laughing out of her innocent joy, and Mr. Grey was 38, and tall and slight and handsome, a little bald on the forehead, lively, quick in his movements, busy, prompt, decided, unfeeling, and in a sort of neatly formed face, which seems to glitter and sparkle with frosty intellect. He was a well-known scientist. I don't know what those words mean, but my mother would certainly have known how to use them and get use out of them. She would know how to make a Ratturier depressed and make him look like he regretted coming there. But that wasn't the best. The best was laboratorium. My mother could organize a cartel that would go after the whole herd. The laboratory was not a book, or a picture, or a place where you wash your hands. As the president's colleague's dog said, no, that's the sink. The laboratory is something else entirely, and is full of jars, and bottles, and electrical things, and cables, and strange machines. And every week other scientists would come and sit there, and use those machines, and discuss, and make what they call experiments and discoveries. And often I would come too, and stand there and listen and try to learn something, for my mother's honor, and in dear memory of her. Though it was painful to me when I realized what I had my son Harvath in which I tried to this. Other times I lay on the floor in front of my mistress's study and slept. She used me tenderly as a footstool, knowing that I liked it because it was a caress. Other times I spent an hour in the nursery and became very disheveled and brought joy. Other times I would watch the crib when the baby was asleep and the nanny would go out for a few minutes to get something for the baby. Other times I would romp and race around the yard and garden with Sadie until we were tired. Then I would nap on the grass in the shade of a tree while she read her book. Other times I went to visit a neighbor's daughter, as there was a retirement once not served here. If you were more than grace, soon. If you see churches, In time my little puppy arrived, and then my cup of joy was full, my happiness was complete. It was the cutest waddling thing, and so smooth and soft and cuddly, and had such cunning little clumsy paws, and such loving eyes, and such a sweet and innocent face. And it made me so proud to see the children and their mother raving over it, and petting it, and marveling at every little wonderful thing it did. It seemed to me that life was too good for me. Then winter came. One day I kept watch in the nursery. I actually slept on the bed. The baby slept in the crib that stood next to the bed, on the side facing the fireplace. It was a crib with a cape over it, made of gauze-like fabric that you could see through. The nanny was outside and we two sleepers were alone. A spark from the firewood shot out and lit the curtain on the side. I suppose it was some time before the baby's cry woke me up, and there was the whole curtain in flames up to the ceiling. Before I could think, I jumped to the floor, and in a second I was halfway to the door, but in the next half second my mother's farewell greeting rang in my ears and I was back beside the bed. I pushed my head through the flames and grabbed the baby by its chest bow, and dragged it out and fell on the floor with it in a puff of smoke. I grabbed a new hold of the baby and dragged the screaming little thing there and out the door and around the bend of the hallway, and was still dragging it away, all excited and joyful and proud, when its master's voice rang out. "Away with you, you damned beast!" And I jumped away to save myself, but he was quite quick, and pursued me, and struck me dreadfully with his walking stick. I dodged this way and that, in this rush, and at last a strong blow struck my left foreleg, causing me to cry out and fall down, helpless for a moment. The walking stick swung out for the 9th blow, but never sank, as the nanny's voice cried wildly, "The nursery is on fire," and the master disappeared in that direction, and my other bones were saved thereby. The pain was terrible, but no matter, I had no time to lose. He might be back at any moment. So I limped on 3 legs to the other end of the hall, where a dark little staircase led up to the attic, where old boxes and such things were kept, I heard, and where people seldom went. I managed to get up there, then picked my way through the piles of different things and hid in the most secret place I could find. It was stupid to be scared there, but I did it anyway, so scared that I could barely hold back the whimper, even though it would be better for me to be able to whimper because it eases the pain, you know that. But I could lick my leg and it was a bit more pleasant. For half an hour there was commotion down there, and screams, and hurried footsteps, and then it was quiet again. Quiet for a few minutes, and that was great for my soul, as my fears began to subside, and fears are worse than pain. Oh, much worse. Then came the sound that made me cringe. They were calling me, calling my name, chasing me. It was muffled by distance, but it couldn't stop the terror I felt, and it was the most terrifying call I'd ever heard. It went everywhere, down there, down the hall, through all the rooms, on both floors, and in the basement and cellar. Then outside, and further away, then back, and all through the house again, and I thought it would never end, never. But finally it stopped. Hours and hours after the twilight of the attic faded into the black darkness. Then in the peaceful silence, the shock subsided and I was at peace and slept. It was a good rest I had, but I woke up before dawn came. I felt quite comfortable, and I was able to come up with a plan. I had found a very good one, which was to sneak down, all the way down the stairs, and hide behind the cellar door, and slip through and disappear when the ice cream man came and opened the fridge. Then I would hide all day, and continue my journey when night came. My journey, well, somewhere where I would not be suspected and would not betray my master. I felt almost great now, then suddenly I thought, why, what a life it will be without my puppy. It was despair. There was no plan for me, I saw that. I had to stay where I was, stay, and wait, and take on what was coming. It wasn't my business. It was what life is. My mother said so. Then, well, the crying started again. All my sufferings came again. I said to myself, the masters will never forgive me. I didn't know what I had done to make them so bitter and unforgiving. Well, I guess it was something a dog couldn't understand, but seemed terrible to a man. They called and called, days and nights, it seemed to me. So long that the hunger and thirst almost drove me mad, and I realized I was getting weak. When you're in this situation, you sleep a lot, and I did. Once I woke up in a terrible fear. It seemed to me as if the call was up in the attic. And so it was. It was Sadie's voice, and she was crying. My name sounded brokenly from her lips, poor thing, and I could not believe my ears when she said, full of joy, "Come back to us. Oh, come back to us, and forgive. It's all so bad without our." I let out one great little scream, and the next moment Sadie was crawling and stumbling through the darkness, dragging herself along, calling loudly to her family so they could hear her, "I found her, I found her." The days that followed, well, they were beautiful. The mother and Sadie and the servants, why, they seemed to adore me. They didn't think soft enough to make my bed, and as for food, they could please me with games as well as delicacies, which were also out of season, and every day friends and neighbors flocked to hear about my exploit. That was the word they used for it, and it means farming. I remember my mother dragged it into the doghouse once, and explained it so, but didn't say what farming was, except that it is a synonym for enclosed white hot, and a dozen times Mrs. Gray and Sadie would tell it to the newcomers, and say I risked my life, and saved the lives of both. and then all the company would marvel and cuddle me in the round, and you could see the pride in Sadie's eyes, and in her mother's, too, and when people wanted to know why I was limping, they looked embarrassed and changed the subject, and sometimes when people didn't give in and asked her about it, it seemed to me as if they were almost crying. And it was not all honor, no, the master's friends came, all 20 different people, and took me to the laboratory as if I were a discovery. And some of them said it was wonderful to see such a display of excellent instincts in such a stupid animal as I was. But the master said with passion, it is far more than instinct, it is mind, and some people, privileged to be saved and to go with me and you towards a better world by virtue of their possession, have less of it than this poor stupid quadruped, which is destined to perish. And then he laughed and said, why do I look so? I am sarcastic. Be blessed by all my great intelligence. The only thing I pointed out was that the dog went mad and tried to hurt the child. That is the intelligence of that animal, that is its mind. I tell you, the child would perish. They argued, and I was the sole focus of the conversation, and I wished my mother would know that this great honor was mine. It would make her proud. Then they discussed optics, as they called it, and whether a certain injury in the brain could lead to blindness, but they couldn't agree on it, and said they must find out in time by experiment. And next they were discussing plants, and that interested me because the Sadie and I were sowing plants in the summer. I helped her dig the holes, you know, and after a few days and days a bush or a flower came out of there, and it was beautiful the way it happened, but it did, and I wished I could talk. I would tell these people and show them how much I knew. Incomparable such it, that I didn't say as was captivated, and one little altitude. Soon spring came, and it was sunny and pleasant and beautiful, and the sweet mother and children patted me and the puppy and went away on a journey and wanted to visit their relatives, and the master was not with us, but we played together and had a good time, and the servants were kind and friendly, and so we got along well and kindly and counted the days waiting for the family. And one day the men came again, and said, now the test, and took the puppy into the laboratory, and I limped there three-legged too, proud because of the attention to my puppy. It was pleasure for me, of course. They discussed and experimented, and then suddenly the puppy shrieked, and they put him on the floor, and he walked around dizzy, his head full of blood, and the master clapped his hands and shouted, there, I've won, see. He's as blind as a bat. And they all said, it is so, you have proved your theory, and suffering humanity stands in great debt to you from now on. And they encircled him, and shook his hand heartily and gratefully, and congratulated him. But I hardly heard or saw the things, for I ran at once to my little darling, and cuddled close to it where it lay, and licked the blood, and it laid its head against mine, whimpering softly, and I knew in my heart that it was pleasant for it to feel its mother's touch in its pain and suffering, though it could not see me. Then it collapsed, suddenly, and its cuddly nose remained on the floor, and it was quiet, and did not move any more. Soon the master stopped discussing for a moment, and rang the butler, and said, bury it in the far corner of the garden, and then he continued the discussion, and I followed the butler, very happy and content, knowing that the puppy was now in no more pain, as it was asleep. We went far down into the garden, to the other end, where the children and the nanny and the puppy and I always played in the summer in the shade of big elm trees, and there the butler dug a hole, and I saw he wanted to plant the puppy, and I was glad, because it would grow and come out as a big dog, like Robin Adair, and be a nice surprise for the family when they came home. So I helped him dig. But my injured leg was really bad, it was stiff, you know, and you need to or it's no good. When the butler stopped and covered little Robin, he patted my head, and there were tears in his eyes, and he said, poor little puppy, you saved his child. I watched for 2 whole weeks and he didn't get up. This last week I was overcome with fear. I think there is something wrong with it. I don't know what it is, but the fear makes me sick, and I can't eat, even though the servants bring me the best food, and they pet me so, and even come to me at night, and cry and say, poor puppy, give it up and come home, don't break our hearts. And all this worried me even more, and made me sure something was happening. And I'm so weak, I haven't been able to stand on my legs since yesterday. And from that hour the servants, looking at the sinking sun, which disappeared from view until the cool night came, began to say things to me that I did not understand, but they brought a chill to my heart. Those poor people, they don't expect it at all. They will come in the morning, and ask at once for the little doggy that did this brave deed, and who of us is strong enough to tell them the truth? The humble little friend has gone, where all animals go when they die.